Morning. Welcome to God in Genesis class. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this good morning. Thank you for your watching care of us. Thank you for this passage of Scripture that we have here in Genesis 16. I pray that you would open up the eyes of our understanding this morning and help us to glean something that would be a blessing and encouragement and a conviction to us. I just pray for your guidance from your Holy Spirit as to what I would say. In Christ's name, amen. Helping God is the title of this morning's class. It has to do with Sarai and Abram deciding to help God when he seemed to be not doing anything. The text is taken from Genesis chapter 15. If you have your Bibles, I encourage you to open them to Genesis chapter 16. We're going to be looking at the first part of that chapter. Helping God. In a New York Times article, journalist Alex Stone tells a story of how executives at a Houston airport faced and then solved a cascade of passenger complaints about how long waits at the baggage claim took. You've all been there. You're standing there watching for that baggage to show up and it just doesn't show up. They first decided to hire more baggage handlers, reducing wait times to an industry-beating average of 8 minutes. But complaints persisted. This made no sense to the executives until they discovered that on the average, passengers took just 1 minute to walk the baggage claim, resulting in a hurry-up-and-wait situation. The walk time was not a problem. The remaining 7 empty minutes of staring at the baggage carousel was. So in a burst of innovation, the executives moved the arrival gates further away from the baggage claim area. Passengers now had to walk much further, but their bags were often waiting for them when they arrived. Problem solved. The complaints dropped. For the same article, Stone interviewed MIT operations researcher Richard Larson, the world's leading expert on waiting in lines, to discover the psychology behind our waiting. What happened at the Houston airport makes for a perfect illustration. According to Larson, the length of our wait is not as important as what we're doing while we wait. Often the psychology of queuing is more important than the statistics of the wait itself, said Larson. Essentially, we tolerate occupied time, for example, walking to baggage claim, far better than unoccupied time, such as standing at the baggage carousel. Give us something to do while we wait, and the wait becomes endurable. That is why so often waiting on God feels like unoccupied time to us. We wait, but what is really happening behind the scenes of our life? Is God actually doing anything? Waiting on God implies developing a new perspective of what God is doing while we wait on Him. I found that illustration very, very pertinent. When you are waiting for something to happen in your life, what are you doing while you're waiting? Are you occupying yourself with something that God wants you to be occupying yourself with? Waiting on God is a universal experience as Christians. How many of you feel like you've waited on God? See hands. Yes. Most of us feel like we've waited. We've waited and nothing's happening. Nothing is happening. We wish it would happen and we don't see it happening. This is something that's not going to change. God has His timing and is going to follow through on His plan. Moses, if you look at the scriptures, spent 1/3 of his life where? In the desert, trailing along behind some miserable little sheep all over that desert. He spent from the time when he was about 40 years old until he was about 80 years old just basically trailing behind some miserable little sheep out in the desert. And he probably was asking God, what in the world is going on here? How important is this? And then God had plans for him for the next 40 years, which was pretty amazing. How we react during our time of waiting is the most important. What do we do during that time when we feel like we're just kind of in a holding pattern, if you will? And that indicates to God and to us the quality of our faith. Are we really trusting God to work it out, or are we starting to doubt that God really is working? That is evident with what we do when we're waiting. Some of us, and I'm one of those people, we feel like somehow we've got to help God during this time of not inaction. We've got to somehow help God. We've got to make things happen. Some of you are more that way than others probably. You feel like the situation is stagnant. Nothing is happening. We've got to make things happen. And often when we do that, things go very badly wrong. As we're going to see in our lesson this morning, things go very badly wrong. Does God need help? Let me throw that out to you. Does God need help? Naomi says no. Anybody else want to venture? Does God need help? No, he doesn't. The Bible's very clear about it. He doesn't need help. He doesn't need help. He has his plan. He has his purpose. He wants us to be involved. He wants us to be working in his kingdom, but it's not because he needs the help. God is able to, is much higher than we are and is able to accomplish his purpose. Should we try to help God? I'm going to say be very careful, because we're looking for some trouble. Okay, our text, we're going to go ahead and read through that. I have it up on the screen if you just want to direct your attention up here. You want to follow along in your Bible, that would be good. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. Where did she get that servant, do you think? Yeah, you got it. While they were in Egypt. Should have they maybe been in Egypt? Probably not. So anyway, there we go. And Sarai said to Abram, "Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." And Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, a spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly I have seen him who looks after me." Therefore the well was called Bir Lahai-roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram his son, and Abram called the name of his son whom Hagar bore Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Okay, that's our passage that we want to look at this morning. Okay, just a bit of an introduction then. It was Sarai's turn to be in the spotlight. Sarai's turn to be in the spotlight. What can you tell me about Sarai so far? What do we know about Sarai?
She was Abram's half-sister.
Okay. And his wife. Okay, what else? What else do we know about Sarai? Had she been in some danger recently? Yes, she was. In Egypt, right? She was beautiful, a beautiful woman, even at that age, very attractive. Do you think Sarai's faith was as mature as Abram's? Any thoughts?
I don't.
Okay. Very possibly it wasn't. We don't know what her faith was like, but it seemed like she came up with the idea of helping God. I don't think it didn't originate with Abram. Sarai decides it's time to help God. She came up with this plan to help God. I would like for you to follow her line of reasoning just a little bit. And sometimes it's dangerous to reason too much like this. God had promised a son to Abram. She knew that. She knew that God had promised a son to Abram and that he would have children like the stars of the sky and the sand of the seashore. Didn't necessarily mean in her mind that the child would need to be hers. There was nothing in there, I don't think, that at least that she knew about that said the child would be hers. It needed to be Abram's, but not necessarily hers. What a terrible plan she has. If you stop and think about it, what a terrible, terrible plan she had. It was a terrible plan. And there was something praiseworthy, I guess, that she seemed to be unselfish.
Do we know whether this would have been customary in their culture?
It was. It was an accepted practice. I'm glad you brought that point up. Among the heathen that they were associating with, especially, it was a custom that was fairly common to happen. And we see that later on also in Jacob, when his wives were not producing children. Goodness knows they had enough of them already, but they got more children by their servants. And so it was a thing that happened quite a bit. So it was not that unusual. But it's still a terrible plan. Okay, God helps those who help themselves. Somebody want to comment? You've probably all heard this thing. It's from 2 Hezekiah 3:15, right? God helps those who help themselves. What's right or wrong about this statement? It's not in the Bible, by the way. What's wrong or right about it?
If you're truly helping yourself, then why do you need God?
There you go. Kind of says, okay, God, you're not doing anything. I'm going to help myself. I am going to be the hero in my own life, and I'm going to help myself. How many of you have done that? God's not doing it. I'm going to do it. Come on. Be frank, be honest. Yeah, we start getting this idea that, God's, you know what? I am going to do it, okay? Because it's not happening. It's not happening. But I want you to be aware of this statement. It was very popular back in the day. I don't think it's that popular anymore. But back in the day, this was a very popular saying, especially among people maybe in a pioneering setting or setting where it wasn't as comfortable. It was very, very popular saying, God helps those who help themselves. You go out there and do it, and then, God will help you. And it's not in the Bible. It's not a biblical concept. What's wrong with it? It puts ourselves in the center, right? Like Connor basically said, it eliminates the need for God. Okay, I got to take the lead, and God obviously is slacking off, and I'm going to help myself. Number 4, helping God has its problems. It has a lot of problems. We cannot see what He sees. We do not understand. We cannot tell the end from the beginning. We often end up messing up very badly. What are some of the consequences that you know of from Abram and Sarai's action here? in fathering Ishmael. What are some of the consequences?
Well, today the Arabs and the Israelites, or Jews, are still at odds with each other.
Still fighting, aren't they?
It goes back to the one verse that was read this morning.
Yes, they're still fighting, still at odds. So there were short-term consequences we can read about in Genesis, right? You know, the fact that there were real problems with Hagar, and there were real problems with Ishmael, and all these other things. And but the long term, it just kept on going. And I'm here to tell you, young people, that it is a real issue if you decide to go ahead of God. It really is. God sometimes steps back and says, okay, I'll watch. I'll watch what you want to do. And he lets you do it. Out of his mercy, many times he doesn't. But he does, and we mess it up. Okay, I am going to throw a series of statements out at you, and we're going to discuss these. Somebody who decides to help God, maybe what they would say. What they would say when they decide to help God. What Abram and Sarai may have said. And then we're going to look at each one of these statements in some new. I will help God because God needs my help. And we've already kind of discussed that God doesn't need our help. But let's look at some issues there. God works through people, right? I'll throw that at you. Does God work through people? Yes, God works through people. But it needs to be his plan, doesn't it? It needs to be his planning. God does work through people. And he uses people. And he wants to use each one of you here in his plan. But we can't use that helping God scenario there. Number 2, Sarai knew that she was barren. She knew the problem. She knew that she could not have children. Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. She knew she was too old now to have children, and she may have rationalized, it's my fault, which it wasn't. But it's my fault, and I've got to fix this situation. And I have this solution. I have a solution in my capability. Number 3, supernatural things we may have questions about. I want to throw a number of them at. Some of the supernatural things that need to happen in lives that are out there, that we may have questions about and have a real struggle waiting for. Can you think of some? What are some supernatural things that need to happen in our lives that we struggle to wait for? Things that God needs to work in, but we end up trying to do them ourselves. Finding a spouse. Good one. Good one. Very pertinent to most people here in this room. It's finding a spouse. We're like, oh my goodness. It's not happening, okay? It is not happening. I don't see anything happening. I'm going to have to take something into my own hands with this. Usually that is a terrible idea, right? You've seen it. God has plans for you, and if you're faithful with God, he will work this out if that's what God's plan is for you. Some of the things that I have here are, wait a minute, I don't have them on the board. Let me just list them off here. That if you want to note them down, that's fine. Someone else's salvation. Okay, you think that somebody should be saved, and you think that is what should be happening. And so I've got to make this happen. And so we try to force this to happen, and we get on someone's case and it doesn't work. A marriage. Someone's marriage. It's in trouble, and God doesn't seem to be working. Maybe it's a health situation. a health situation that you're struggling with, and you're saying, God, you're just not taking care of this situation. Maybe it's a ministry that I feel that needs to be happening. My dream of serving God. Okay, number 4, nothing is happening. I will help because God needs my help. Nothing is happening. Number 5, God needs my money. He would like us to give money, but He doesn't need it. When nothing happens, we need to come up with plan B. That's my own words, plan B. When nothing happened, we need to come up with plan B. I've been waiting for years, nothing is happening. I want to go to plan B. I've got to do something. I've lain awake and thought this thing through. Okay, so that's the first response you might hear out there about helping God. I will help God because God needs my help. In the case of Abram and Sarai, they said, okay, it's just not happening. And so we'll come up with a second solution. God needs our help. Okay, the second one is I will help God because I cannot wait for God's timing. This is a big one, and we've kind of been skirting around this issue already. I will help God because I cannot wait for God's timing. How long had it been since God had promised Abram and Sarai a child? Does anybody know offhand? From our text, you could kind of figure it out. How old was Abram when they went to Canaan and when he was promised a child?
Was it 10 years?
It was 10 years. He was 75 when he got into the land, and it was 10 years later that they decided to take this action. Okay, a couple of points I'd make here. The custom was not unusual that they were going to try to use to help God. We discussed that already. Number 2, it's been 10 years since the promise. Number 3, God does have a purpose for requiring a wait in our lives. Last Sunday's class was called Believing God, right? Abram believed God was actually the title. How many of you believe that God has a purpose in our waiting? How many of you really believe? Okay. I sometimes start doubting it. I know if you're human as I am, I suspect that you start to doubt. You start to doubt. Okay, He has a purpose in people like Abram, okay? They were important people. He has a purpose in other people's lives, and we've seen it. But in my life, why? What in the world? I'm just here spinning my tires. And there's nothing going on in my life. And so, God does have a purpose. I want to assure you of that. There is nothing. Everything, Romans 8:28, that happens to the believer happens for good. And that includes a wait time. That includes a wait time. It really does. Okay, what are some of the things that God uses in our wait time? One is preparation. I have a list there I want to go over there. That there is preparation that goes on in our lives. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and some of you are familiar with some of his writings. He was in prison in Nazi Germany for resisting the Third Reich. In his letters and papers from prison, he writes this: everything has its time, and the main thing is that we keep step with God and do not keep pressing on a few steps ahead, nor keep dawdling a step behind. It's presumptuous to want to have everything at once: matrimonial bliss, the cross, the heavenly Jerusalem, where they neither marry nor are given in marriage. Everything has its time. Moses was a different person when he came back out of the wilderness than he was when he left. We too can will change as we wait, as we allow God to prepare us. We become bigger people. We become more humble. We become more patient. We become more understanding and more dependent on God. Richard Hendricks says, second only to suffering, waiting may be the greatest teacher and trainer in godliness, maturity, and genuine spiritually most of us will ever encounter. Some of the best training is going to happen while we wait. And some of us get so impatient, but that's what's happening. I'm not ready. I will do more harm than good if I launch out right now. I'm proud. I'm abrasive. I feel in control. I struggle with a lot of selfishness. I struggle with self-importance. Maybe I struggle with fear. But God is preparing me. Secondly, strengthening of faith. Strengthening of faith happens while we're waiting. Strengthening of our faith. Our faith is getting stretched. It's getting stretched. It's getting stretched out because of our waiting. Number 3, the benefit of those watching us. The benefit of those watching us. Look at that person. They are patiently waiting for God to work. To give me the best. I can go ahead and try something on my own, but it's not what God really wants from me. He wants to give me the best. And finally, unknown purpose. Okay. For a lot of you, that's where it is right now. There's an unknown reason that I'm waiting. I don't know. I have no idea. But it's a purpose there. Okay, the next hypothetical. I will help God because I trust someone else's idea. You know why I'm bringing that one up, don't you? Yeah. I will trust God. I will help God because I trust someone else's idea. Consider Abram's situation. And I'd like you to think just a little bit about Abram in this situation. And most of you are not married. For those of you who are married and are male, you understand this probably better than the rest of you. His situation. Okay, there he is. He's trying to trust God, right? He's trying to trust God. He really is. It's 10 years. And now his wife comes up with this suggestion. What's he going to do? What is Abram going to do? Did he do the wrong thing? Anybody? Did Abram do the wrong thing when Sarai says, go ahead and have a child with my servant? When Abram said, okay, we'll do it. Did he do the wrong thing? It was wrong. It was wrong. It was wrong. I couldn't agree more. It was wrong. And for you men in this room, whether you're married or not yet married, our young people, the buck stops with you. Don't ever forget it. If you forget everything else I say today, the buck stops with you. You're going to have to get a backbone, and you're going to have to say no. And from my experience as a father and a husband, that is difficult to do. Because you're going to get all kinds of flack. You're going to, look at you, you all stick in the mud. You just said no. Okay? And Abram should have said no. Yes, he should have. Number 2, following the advice of someone else less mature. Be careful here, folks, following the advice of someone who is less mature spiritually just because you like that advice. Don't do it. Number 3, why did Abram acquiesce? I like to throw a word like that in every once in a while. Makes me look good, right? Acquiesce. What does acquiesce mean?
Go along with it.
Give in, yes.
Go along.
Go along. Yes. Yes. Why did he acquiesce? Somebody want to answer? Why do you think he went along with Sarai's plan?
of made sense.
It kind of made sense, didn't it? You know what? It kind of makes sense. Someone else.
Probably application system.
It was. It definitely was. Trust me. He shouldn't have.
He didn't see the consequences.
He didn't see the consequences. Yes, he didn't. He didn't take time to really look at the consequences.
The Bible says Abram believed God when God made the promise.
He did.
And he really wanted to see it come to pass.
He did. And he was trying to help God also, probably. Okay. So it kind of made sense. He wanted to it so badly. Okay. He wanted that son so badly. He didn't have the backbone to say no. These are all questions, maybe. Okay, moving on. We are running out of time rapidly. I will help God and then blame someone else when things go wrong. I will help God and then blame someone else. You know where I'm going, don't you? Yes, you do. My sympathies lie with Abram in this situation. They really do. Maybe it's just a male thing, I don't know. But my sympathies lie with Abram. Sarai comes back and says, "It's your fault. You messed this whole thing up." When I try to help God, it is my idea, okay? If I try to help God, it's mine. I have to be responsible. Number 3, the blame game fixes nothing. It's so much easier to fix blame than it is to fix problems. See that all the time, especially in your work situation. The blame game fixes nothing. Number 5, I will help God because I have not thought through the consequences. I cannot see. I cannot know. I cannot know the future. We can't look into the future. I cannot know. I don't see. I do not understand. There were the immediate consequences. We talked about this. There were the immediate consequences of Hagar and Ishmael, of strife in the home. There were the future consequences that were there. And Jason mentioned that, brought that frontward. Future consequences. It's still ongoing today. Number 4, running ahead of God does have consequences. I want to stress that with you all. Running ahead of God does have consequences. Some of them are very severe, others not so much. Gordon MacDonald shares the following. Ben Patterson, a man I treasure as a friend, tells a story from his personal life. In the summer of 1988, 3 friends and I climbed Mount Lyell, the highest peak in Yosemite National Park. 2 of us were experienced mountaineers, 2 of us were not. I was not one of the experienced 2. The climb to the top and back was to take the better part of a day, due in part to the difficulty of the glacier that one must cross to get to the top. As the hours passed and we trudged up the glacier, the 2 mountaineers opened up a wide gap between me and my lesser experienced companion. Being competitive by nature, I began to look for shortcuts I might be able to take to beat them to the top. I thought I saw one to the right of an outcropping of rocks, so I went up, deaf to the protests of my companions. 30 minutes later, I was trapped in a cul-de-sac of rock atop the Lyell Glacier, looking down several hundred feet of a sheer slope of ice. Pitched at a 45-degree angle, I was only 10 feet from the safety of a rock, but one little slip and I wouldn't stop sliding until I had landed in the valley floor about 50 miles away. I was stuck, and I was scared. Patterson's words are non-religious ways of describing the predicament that more than a few of us fall into. People get stuck because they're competitive, they want to make an impression, they think they have all of life under control, so they take shortcuts to beat other people. They take the right-hand turn around an outcropping of rocks, suspecting that at the end there will be nothing but joy and roses. Instead, they find themselves stuck. Back to Ben Patterson, who was stuck and scared. It took an hour for my experienced climbing friends to find me. Standing on the rock I wanted to reach, one of them leaned out and used an ice axe to chip 2 little footsteps in the glacier. Then he gave me the following instructions. Ben, you must step out from where you are and put your foot where the first foothold is. Without a moment's hesitation, swing your other foot across and land it in the next step. Then reach out and I will take your hand and will pull you to safety. But listen carefully. As you step across, don't lean into the mountain. If anything, lean out a bit. Otherwise, your feet will fly out from under you and you'll start sliding down. Patterson says, when I'm on the edge of a cliff, my instinct is to lie down and hug the mountain, to become one with it, not lean away from it. But that was what my good friend was telling me to do as I stood trembling on that glacier. I looked at him real hard. For a moment, based solely on what I believed to be true about the goodwill and good sense of my friend, I decided to say no to what I felt, to lean out, step out, and traverse the ice to safety. It took less than 2 seconds to find out if my faith was well-founded. It was. The things that we do, stepping out ahead of God, can get us into so much trouble. Okay, I have just a few words of advice to pass along to you. A couple of action items out of the lesson today. Number 1, seek the face of God for direction. Seriously seek the face of God for direction in your life. Not just because I'm telling you, but because you want God's direction. Number 2, take time with decisions. I know. I've been there. Take time with decisions. Don't do it rashly. You will regret it. You will repent at leisure. Number 3, understand where good results come from. Good results come from God. They don't come from our hasty actions. Number 4, seek counsel from those who are spiritually mature. Seek counsel from those who are spiritually mature. Don't go for the counsel to somebody who you believe will agree with you, okay? Because they will agree with you and they may be just as immature as you are, okay? Seek counsel from someone who is mature. Someone you respect. Somebody maybe that has a few miles on them, okay? Someone who's been a Christian for a good while. Seek their counsel. Number 5, check your motives. What are your motives here? Check your motives. Number 6, be patient. That's probably the hardest one for a lot of you to do. Be patient in making your decisions. Okay, helping God. I think we came across with the idea that God doesn't need our help, that God will work things out in His own time, and we need to stand in step with what God is doing in our lives and stay in touch with Him. God bless.